Hey everybody, I just got done reading the book after a couple times and I took a pretty good amount of notes, so hopefully I can get through everything within this time. Right into chapter one, it basically just breaks down the, the correlation between learning and teaching and how it's pretty much been hand in hand since it's been dawn of time of people learning how to walk through being taught by others and just visual concepts and things of that nature. So they were always taught by somebody, but it was really more of a visual thing. As we kind of get into it, it really starts to go into the thick of it. And one of the few quotes that actually grabbed me right away was the one where it talked about from West Side Story, where Riff says, "From womb to tomb," which I actually very much remember that quote, and I never really thought about it that way. About right from you when you come out of the womb, you're basically learning, and whether you know it or not, you're gaining knowledge from everything around you. The more we go into it, it starts to break down that really school and education aren't the same thing. It's more schools are there for the institution, but education itself is a totally separate matter. Mark Twain put it really great that I never let my schooling interfere with my education. And I've actually read a good amount of Mark Twain stuff, and I don't know how many of you know, but most of his education was very informal, and I believe that most of the things that he learned was just from his surroundings and things like that, and he's a very accomplished writer from that. Some say that really school may be a hindrance to education, that it's kind of in the way of some people learning, and that kind of goes in different things that people learn differently, especially children on top of that. And it just really breaks down more of the differences between, the modernisms of how people learn and like should we be telling kids to really focus on more on facts or really focus on what things that interest them in schooling. So, but that gets a little bit more ahead into chapter two. We go right into it, just pretty much how schooling and things started with the Greeks of how they set up all of their education. Basically, from my knowledge, from what I've read, it hasn't changed very much. It really has been more detailed and kind of gotten more modernized, but really it's more of a roadmap of what's the same, with a lot more abuse added. Of definitely corporal punishment was more widely accepted and definitely used a lot more. And honestly, when I read that, I would honestly say that kind of started the original disdain for people learning and from school. So I thought that was very interesting. Skipping ahead to Shakespeare time, that's really when things kind of solidified into what we're used to today in schools from elementary going into middle school, high school, and college, although they had very different names for that. Yeah, and then we got kind of get more ahead into where Don Jacques Rousseau, and I'm sure I'm messing up that name, who I've actually read before as well, and his prints going into education from Emile were actually really groundbreaking at the time. And it goes more into, well, maybe there's more of a different way to do it, and really there's gets into more the progressive versus the formal. And when I got more into reading of that, it was more for me. It ended up being a lot more of a, oh, well, of course, why, who doesn't learn like that, or why would you not want to learn that way? But the more I read about it, it was really the formal has always been there. The formal is one of those things where it's been solidified since the Greeks and since Shakespeare time, but it's the progressives like Jacques Rousseau who really kind of were pushing the buttons and trying to contrast a lot of those things. And a lot of that's really basic kind of things to me. It didn't seem like really out there as it seems where they say progressive. There's a really good breakdown in the chart on page 31 where it just really gives the breakdown of progressive education versus formal education. And for me, reading that, I took formal education more like it's the building blocks. Like those are your basic knowledge skills of how you learn or retaining information or facts and how you would use those. And really, I thought progressive education was more like advanced learning, where you like just we're all studying music. Maybe the building blocks for music is learning your theory, learning your scales and things like that. And maybe the progressive you could equate to you learning jazz and how to really perform those things and how a wrong note could be considered something totally different. So I thought it was an interesting way, but for me it was very much of like, well, of course, this makes sense to me, but maybe not for anybody else. So I'd be really interested to see where people kind of come from in that way. Progressive education for me just seemed very much like, oh, this is just reading same knowledge over again. Just it's what I'm thinking. And really, when we get from there, it's just a lot of formal education says this, progressive education says that. It's just two different styles, but I think it's broken down into basic learning and basic functioning skills for formal, and progressive more advanced learning. So I'm interested to see what everyone has to say and gave me really good feedback.